This is Christianity 101, the podcast connecting busy people with Jesus. I'm your host, Rick Grundy. This is episode 8, our Halloween special. Okay, absolutely a true story. I'm just coming off of a youth retreat, and so this is going way back, like I'm guessing 16, just coming off a youth retreat. And then I was in this home, I was talking to this lady, and her husband is upstairs, I'm downstairs, and we're talking about the Bible. Strange scenario, I'm just giving you the basics of it. And as I'm talking to this lady about the Bible, about things that I had just learned on the youth retreat, suddenly this lady begins to manifest. She starts acting like she wants to claw my eyes out. And while she's acting like she wants to claw my eyes out, she's going loopy, dancing on the couch and just crazy stuff. Suddenly her husband from upstairs, he makes this sound like he's some kind of roaring lion. And all I'm doing is I'm quoting the Bible. I'm talking about Jesus, I'm quoting the Bible. That's all I'm doing, reading right out of the Gospel of Mark. And as far as I remember, it was Mark. And so I didn't have a clue what to do. So since I was coming right off my youth retreat, my youth pastor was in my head, so I called him. I said, listen, you got to come over right away. I have no idea what's happening in this house, but you got to come now. So my youth pastor comes by pretty quickly. And then when he was here, because he was really close, when he was finally in the house, he and I were just praying over this woman, and we cast a demon out of her. It was the very first time I had ever seen anything like that happen before. I didn't even know it was a possibility because I became a Christian when I was 13, but I wasn't really exposed to this until just that moment. It was brand spanking new to me. Now, okay, so is that story freaky or what? Is that story even real, you might be asking yourself? Do you even believe me? Like, this stuff's still going today. Spiritual things, like demons, they may seem really, really odd. They may seem really, really scary to you when you start talking about the demonic stuff and the spiritual darkness kind of stuff. Well, today, in this episode, I like to demystify some of that for you, and I'd like to empower you. Today, this episode, when we're done, I know that you can be walking away from this podcast not just aware, but also completely confident when it comes to spiritual things, spiritual darkness, the demons, the devil. In today's episode, today's theme is the devil, demons, and disciples. Yeah, this is a Halloween podcast, and for the first time since I've started podcasting, I want to just take a moment to address this theme, the devil, demons, and disciples. What are they? Where'd they all come from? And what is there to worry about, if anything? I don't have a single text that I'm working from. I have a bunch of different texts that I'm working from. So here's an idea of what you're going to hear in this podcast. First of all, I'm going to talk about the devil. Second of all, going to talk about demons. And then thirdly, going to talk about the disciples, really with these three kind of subheadings. Who or what are they? What is their origin, and what kind of power do they have, which includes disciples. And then I'm going to end in a little Q&A. I told a group of people what I was speaking on in this podcast, and I asked for questions. So some people gave me some questions, and I'm going to, at the end of this podcast, I'm going to be answering specific questions that people have about the devil, about demons, about demon possession. I'll be answering those kind of questions at the end of the podcast, so hang in right to the end.
It is a monster mash. It was a graveyard smash.
Okay, so first of all, I want to start by talking about the devil. And everyone maybe, well, a lot of people maybe were thinking about a red guy in some kind of black cape with horns on his head and a pitchfork. Who or what is the devil? Let's just start with that heading right there. Who or what is the devil? The very first occurrence of this diabolos. Now I can't pronounce Greek very well. It's like diabolos or something like that. Or in Spanish, it's easy, diablo. It looks kind of very similar to the Greek word diablo, the devil. Very first occurrence, Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. Text says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God really say you must not eat any tree in the garden?'" So in the very beginning of Genesis, what we see, particularly in Genesis chapter 1, is we see this benevolent creator, God, who from nothing creates the heavens and the earth. He creates everything. And then when he's done with all of that part of creation, then he creates humanity. And he really makes humanity his image bearers. He breathes life into them and sets them up as his representative over all of creation. So humanity represents God over all of creation. That's how he set up that relationship. And there's a very deep felt relationship in between God and humanity. So we see this benevolent creator. Then in Genesis chapter 3, after we see the benevolent creator, after we see what humanity has been made to be, then we see this new character entering the scene in chapter 3. And immediately we see a tempter testing someone's faithfulness in order to break their bond with God. Now that's going to be a recurring theme all through the Bible. Whatever this thing called the devil is, it's this thing that tempts and tests someone's faithfulness, trying to break their bond, the bond that they have with God. And of course that has to do with a choice. No power to make a choice for a person, can't beat someone over the head to force them to make this choice, but they tempt. This thing tempts, and then it's up to the person to choose well or to not to choose well. And then after that, another significant verse in Genesis 3 is Genesis 3:15, which really talks about who the devil is again. "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." And that's the very first prophecy that we see about Jesus right there. Very first prophecy about Jesus, Genesis 3:15, right there. So we see the devil as an entity in direct opposition with God, and also we see God's plan to ultimately destroy him. So he's in opposition to God, opposition to what humanity is, so to humanity itself, and he wants to pull humanity and God away from each other. So God's plan will be to restore the broken relationship caused by this temptation and end any future attempts to destroy relationship. Here's just a little aside, okay? Just a heads up, going to get off devil, demon, disciples for a second. Here's just an aside. Did you know that biblical prophecy doesn't always look forward? As a matter of fact, it doesn't often look forward. It often looks back and refers back to right here, this plan. God's plan is to stop the entity who tempts and tests our friendship with God, and then forever bring his true children into a protected and eternal relationship where the bond will never be tested and broken again. So a lot of the prophecy in the Bible tends to look back to this original promise and this original setting in Genesis to reveal this is really where God is going. Right back from Genesis, here's the promise, here's where God is going. So prophecy is looking back. I mean, in Revelation, we learn that the nature, the spirit of prophecy is the gospel of Jesus. So it's all looking back to Genesis. Let me give you a heads up about Genesis, because Genesis is a unique book, not repeated until through the rest of the Bible, kind of in Revelation, but let me just talk about it for a second. And I'm going to give you a cool illustration, okay? Very cool illustration to bring you back to the 80s maybe, man. Early 90s, late 80s. When I was a teenager, about 18, I think, I had a job, I was making some money, and I loved the movie Star Wars and wanted to watch it and couldn't watch it enough. So what I did is I gathered all my money together, and I went out and I bought a 4-head VHS player. And we're going back, a 4-head VHS player for the most HD video there was available, and with stereo sound. It's so awesome, and I bought this, and I remember putting it in my backpack, because I didn't have a vehicle. I put it in my backpack and rode home with the thing in my backpack, and then I set it up in my basement and with this huge TV that someone was getting rid of, like one of those really, really big ones, you know, that it's really thick, really fat, and heavy. And I had it because I was like 18 and I was strong enough to carry it, and somebody else didn't want it because it was too heavy. So I brought it down to my basement, and then I also had these 2 really huge speakers, the kind that had the wooden cabinets, Like they were like, I don't know, 3 feet high or 4 feet high, solid wooden cabinets, and they had these 2 or 3 speakers on the inside. So I was all set up for stereo sound from a VHS, and I was just, wow, this is so cool. I got to bring my friends over. So I brought my friends over to my basement apartment where I was in, and I only had my TV, my 2 big speakers, and my bed. So we're all sitting on the edge of my bed watching Star Wars, and we were so, I know I'm geeking out here, but we were so coolified, if that's a word, as we heard sounds coming from different sides of the room. We hear monsters coming from the left side and people speaking coming from the right side, and we're like, whoa, this is so cool. Way back then with my 4-head VHS in stereo sound. Here's why I take us back to that, to my little moment back there. Because Star Wars is typical of most storylines. For the first hour, it's simply development. You think you're watching a movie, but you're not really watching the movie yet. You're just being introduced to the characters in the storyline. So the major characters in that first hour, we learned that the major characters are Luke, Leia, Han, and Darth Vader. We learned that supporting characters are R2-D2, C-3PO, Chewie, Ben Kenobi. What do you mean? Ben Kenobi isn't a main character? Well, of course, put him where you want to. And then we learned what the minor characters are, like the Jawas and Uncle Ben and Aunt Prue, and I'm so sorry how they ended. And then we learned about the plot. There's an evil trying to control the universe, but there's a good that's trying to overcome it. So we can say that it's a classical story of good overcoming overwhelming evil. Now, why did I take us there? Because this is why I took us there. Because Star Wars and the Bible have something in common. Just like Star Wars and all other movies and stories, it sets up the main characters, it sets up the plot, and the Bible does the same thing in the book of Genesis. Genesis is a book unto itself. It's never duplicated through the Bible. Now, Revelation kind of runs similar to what Genesis is trying to do. It's as I teach it, I almost teach it like it's Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. I almost teach it a little bit like that. Genesis is the prologue to the Bible. It's giving us a heads up about what's to be covered. So it doesn't give us all of the answers right away. It gives us some insights into what's coming up. It gives us the topic as to what's coming up and what to expect over the rest of the book. Now, therefore, very, very importantly, we need to know this. Genesis doesn't try to answer the smaller questions. There's a lot of questions that Genesis poses without giving answers to it, because the answers are to come later on. It just points to the big answer, and the big answer it points to is found in Genesis 3. Humanity has a problem with sin, and Jesus is the answer. Okay, so Genesis is setting us up that humanity has a problem, there's an answer to come, Genesis 3:15, so it's setting us up. Now, I know you see a snake in Genesis. I get that. I see a snake too. But the devil isn't a snake, okay? It's just the prologue. Genesis is just a prologue showing us who the major players are, who the major characters in the Bible will be. It's showing us that the major characters are God, people, and Satan. Okay, that's what Genesis is doing for us. And we also see minor characters. We see other spiritual beings as well throughout Genesis as well. They're minor characters. So who is the devil? What is Genesis telling us about this entity, this thing that shows up in the garden, represented by a serpent here? Like, what's going on here? Who's the devil? He is our only adversary. Okay, he's our only adversary. He's the initiator of the evil we see in our world, in that he has tempted it and influenced it to happen. So specifically, he's the one tempting God's people, testing their bond with God so that he can influence someone to break their bond with God and follow his influence instead. Okay, that's the picture that's being painted here. His power is temptation, so he influences people to live outside of a relationship with God. Why is the world getting darker and darker, scarier and worse? Well, because more and more people are allowing Satan, the devil, to influence them to live outside of a relationship with God. And he's bringing them farther and farther away from God, making it harder and harder for them to connect with God. So the world is becoming a scary and scary place. Okay, so then if that's what the devil is, who the devil is, how are we to understand ourselves within that context of the story? So here's a way. We are the sheep. We can call ourselves the sheep because we got to follow something. We're either following God or not. We're the sheep that have been following the wrong shepherd. As a result, we're heading to the slaughterhouse. Now, of course, that little picture I just painted there, you won't really see that in Genesis, but that is how we're being set up. We're following the wrong person. We're following the wrong thing, and it is destroying us. We're not getting more healthy. We're actually getting worse and worse. What else do we know about the devil? Let's talk about the New Testament for a second. We know that he's the prince of demonic beings. We know that. There are 40 occurrences throughout the New Testament that reveal that he is the prince of demonic beings. So he's got there's some sort of chain of command. He's some sort of leader of all the spiritually dark forces. This is the kingpin, the big guy who's in charge of all the demon activity. He's a kingpin. So all of these other beings underneath his chain of command, they're also influencing people to break their bond with God and to follow an ungodly life so that they continue to move farther and farther and farther away from God, making it harder and harder for them to connect with God. Here's another aside. Okay, so by the way, this means something really good for us. It means something good for you and good for me. And I'll tell you why. Because those of us who are rejecting the devil's influence to break our bond with God and live an ungodly life, we're rejecting that. The devil and demons then, it means that they have no power over us. Yes, temptation will come and will never stop. The devil and his demons, they are zealous about their mission. Yes, persecution and martyrdom will always be present in this world as people follow the devil's influence, but the only power they have is the power that we choose to give them when we choose to do things that hurt our bond with God. They can tempt us, they can test us, but we have the power of choice. We can either choose to follow that, or we can choose, no, I'm going to protect. I choose to protect and hold on to my relationship with God. Here's another thing we know about the devil, based in the New Testament. He is humanity's arch enemy. This is coming from the New Testament, not the Old Testament, not Genesis. From the New Testament, he's humanity's arch enemy. Matthew chapter 13:39 says, the weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. So that's coming from a parable that Jesus is describing. He's answering to his disciples. It means that persecution and human oppression will always exist, because the devil is our arch enemy, always sending aggression towards Christians in order to try to break that bond that we have with God. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 11, again, the devil is our arch enemy. Ephesians 6:11, put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. So this thing, the devil, will constantly be an influence, sending tests and temptations to make you want to choose to hurt your friendship with God. That's what's going on here. Revelation 12:9. Now, Revelation is crazy hard to understand. I get that, but I'm going to attempt it here. Revelation 12:9. The great dragon was hurled down, the ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Okay, now this is a symbolic way of communicating that he's our arch enemy and that he will be dealt with permanently. Let's look at the Old Testament one more time. In the Old Testament, Satan is a concept that really takes a lot of the Old Testament to develop. We're not going to see the devil as clearly defined as in the New Testament. So by the time we get to the New Testament, we're giving a much better glimpse of him as though he's an individual who is actually named. But it took a long time to get us there. The Old Testament identifies him as Satan, as a spiritual, maybe even a heavenly being, like in the case of Job, a being who is the plotter and the false accuser. The Old Testament almost sets up Satan as though he's part of a heavenly court on assignment. When you think about Job, he's actually entering the book of Job. He's entering God's throne room, and he's like, "What are you doing here, accuser? Have you considered your servant Job?" Almost like he's part of the heavenly court. The New Testament, though, corrects some of that misunderstanding that we may have coming out of the Old Testament. The New Testament reveals his truer nature, that he's the supernatural enemy of God and his people, who causes suffering for God's people and strives to lead God's faithful people away from faithfulness. So he's trying to break the bond that we have, God between people. He's trying to break that. Now, let's finish this up here with just the definition of who the devil is, with his ultimate fate. His ultimate fate is the lake of eternal fire. Revelation 20, verse 10. And again, this is metaphorical, I get it. It's symbolism, but it really points to where God is taking all of this. Revelation 20:10, and the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So God has a plan to ultimately deal with the devil, and it will be forever torment. So let's talk about his origin. Where did the devil come from? Okay, how could a loving, benevolent God create such an evil beast? Well, let's talk about that. In the Old Testament, let's look at the Old Testament to see where we can figure out what his origin was. He was an angel who rejected God. So it seems that angels were given a choice, just like you and I, as people, we were also given a choice. And Isaiah 14:12 alludes to that. Isaiah 14:12. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You've been cast down to the earth. You who once laid low the nations. Speaking about this devil, almost as though he's the archangel, in some cases the morning star. How glorious this guy is, and he rebelled against God and then was cast out of his presence. It's almost painting a similar story as the story of Eden, how we were cast out of the presence of God because we made a choice not to serve him anymore, to follow Satan, to go his own way. Now he led, so again about his origin now, the devil, he led a heavenly rebellion and he lost. And we see that in Revelation 12:7-9, where we see a story that's kind of looking back, trying to trace the origins of where all this stuff is coming from. It says, then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, the ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. So what we see here is we see that the devil rose up in opposition against God. He had followers, they were angels, and they were somehow cast out of heaven, cast away from the presence of God. Now, heads up here, his angels are what we currently call demons. The devil didn't create demons. They're not some kind of weird kind of thing. They're not dead people coming back from the grave. They're not zombies. They're not whatever you might like to think about them. They're not spirits of old souls from long ago. There's nothing like that going on. These are literally angels who followed Satan into rebellion against God. And their war continues by them bringing in humanity and trying to hurt the relationship that we have with God. What about his power? We've talked about who he is. We've talked about his origin. What about his power? What kind of power does he have? What do we need to be cautious of, to be wary of, to be warned about, to be afraid of? Listen, when talking about the devil's power, there's a lot of good news here. And of course, there's a stern warning here too, that we have to be wise about this. When you hear what his power is, you're going to be relieved. But don't become too relieved that you grow apathetic, okay? His main weapon that we see him use all the time is temptation or trial. Even when he went toe-to-toe, head-to-head with Jesus, what was his weapon? Temptation. We see this really clearly in Genesis chapter 3, also in Job, and in Jesus' temptations in the wilderness. He does things to test a believer's faithfulness. He tempts in order to to break someone's bond with God. So, James chapter 4, verse 7 is an awesome verse for all of us. The text says, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil and he will flee. What do we do in moments of temptation? What do we do in our dealings with the devil? And we all have dealings with the devil, and I'll unpack that a little bit more in just a moment. What do we do in moments of temptation? We submit ourselves to God. When temptation comes our way, that tries to that influences us away from God to try to break our bond with God, what do? We don't submit to it. We submit to God, which means we follow the relationship. We cling to the relationship. We protect the relationship that we have with God. And what's going to happen when we work to protect the relationship we have with God? It says he will flee from you. James 4:7. If you say no to the things that hurt your friendship with God, the devil has no more power over you. The devil doesn't directly touch anyone to hurt them. He affects people through his influence. Okay, now wait a minute. That sounds too good to be true. Okay, well, yes and no. In Hebrews, we've been studying Hebrews, if you've been following the podcast, we've been seeing how apathy affected the church. The church was listening to temptations too much, and their friendship with Jesus was in danger of dissolving. Temptation is very, very powerful. Okay, now wait a minute, though. Also, in Revelation, the devil looks huge. In Genesis, he's a little snake, a little garden snake. In Revelation, the thing is huge. I mean, how did this little garden snake in Genesis, suddenly in Revelation become this huge multi-headed dragon taking up the space of a whole ocean? Like, what's the deal here? He must be getting stronger. How big is he going to get? How did he get that big? The devil, metaphorically, symbolically in Revelation, grows so much, gets so huge from that little garden snake into that huge beast that we see. Because, here's the reason he's getting bigger, because humanity has been feeding him. That's how he's getting bigger. His influence is growing. As people continue to be influenced away from a relationship with God, they continue to be influenced into creating an ungodly world. Bum, bum, bum. We're feeding him, and we need to stop feeding him. That ungodly world will be increasingly harder for believers to live in. When the world is continually being influenced by the devil and influenced by all these ideas that will lead people away from God, make it harder and harder for them to connect with God, ultimately it'll lead to that final headbutt of the world history as God closes the door of salvation and human history by putting an end to the devil and setting up an eternal kingdom. It's coming to that place where finally God's going to say enough is enough. It's showdown time. And it's going to be like this Old West scene as God and Satan shows up in the middle of this town, and he's going to say, draw. And it's going to be over. God is going to finally put an end to it. So here's a summary of who the devil is, what the devil is, who the devil is. Here's the summary. In summary, the devil is our arch enemy. The devil is working to tempt the world, which includes you. The devil is influencing people to break their bond with Jesus. He's still doing it. He's still active doing that. The devil is influencing people to pursue a life that leads them farther and farther away from God. Okay, so let's just take a pause here, and let me ask, how are you doing in your dealings with the devil? Yes, you have dealings with the devil. If you're being tempted, that's exactly what that is. He doesn't make you do bad things. He can't make you do bad things. You and I can never say, oh, the devil made me do it. This is not right. He can only tempt you, and he does all the time. So now is a really good time to ask, what are you doing that hurts your friendship with God? Because if you're doing something that hurts your friendship with God, then in your dealings with the devil, you're coming out pretty negatively there. Now here's the solution. Resist him, and he's going to flee. He can't do anything other than flee if you resist him. The more you befriend God, the less successful he's going to be with you. Let's move on and let's talk about demons. And first, let's start by asking the question, who or what are they? This is going to be brief because a lot of this stuff was answered when we talked about the devil. So, first of all, who or what are they? In Revelation 12:7-9, we already read that. They are fallen angels led by Satan. That's who they are. They're fallen angels led by the devil. So that means a couple of things. They're not created by Satan. Satan does not have the power to create like God does, not created. They are a part of a rebellion against God that we've been sucked into. They operate in alignment with the devil. So they follow their marching orders. The devil's he's the prince of the demons. They're following him in this spiritual war Their job is to tempt people and break their bond with God. Okay, that's who they are. Let's talk about their power, because this is where the really interesting conversation comes from, okay? Like, we all think we kind of know who they are. Sure, they're fallen angels, they're demons, we get that. But what about their power? What's with all this stuff about demon possession? Let's start us off on this with Mark chapter 1, 32 to 34. Coming from Mark, it says this: That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. There it is. It exists. It's possible even today. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons. There it is again. But he wouldn't let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Yeah, people can be demonized. It can be demon-possessed. Call it demonized, call it demon-possessed. It is real. Okay, what does that mean exactly? If somebody can be demon-possessed, what does it mean exactly? How do I know that it's happening? Do they look like zombies? Like, what's going on here? It means that an event has occurred in a person's life where someone has surrendered to the influence of a demon, causing them to break relationship with God, live ungodly. The demon didn't force themselves into this person. It happens voluntarily. Now here's the key point. The person has surrendered control somehow. For example, a good example from the Old Testament of this is King Saul. King Saul rejected God. He rejected God so much, and he continued to do things that were out of alignment with God, even consulting a witch, that he got himself a demon. Because of his continual choice to reject God, he became tormented by a demon. And as a matter of fact, that's why he hired David. The reason how David got himself into the king's household at all is because when David played the harp, the demon stopped bugging him. And so David and the king became great friends because, David was like his Advil, his Tylenol. The torment stopped as David was worshiping God, playing his harp. King Saul's choices opened him up to demonic oppression. It wasn't because a demon just overpowered him and Saul lost control. That's not how it works. Saul opened himself up. Saul surrendered to the influence of the devil, the influence to break relationship with God and live ungodly. So King Saul was directly in conflict with God, saying no. And that's the example that we need to draw on when understanding, okay, how do we set ourselves up for demon? Mark chapter 5, verse 2 to 10. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs. Night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran, fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of God Most High? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What's your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for there are many." Yeah, people can have more than one demon. Yeah, and yes, I have seen it. People can have more than one demon, and more than one demon can come out of people. Now, I want you to look at a little deeper at this story here, though, because we're looking at how can a person become demon-possessed. Okay? Look deeper in the story, because Mark is not going to offer backstories in Mark. He's going to want to he wants to get to the point very, very quickly, and Jesus is moving from moment to moment very, very quickly, not interested in backstories, just here's the story, there you go. So we need to be careful here, slow down a little bit, look at the text. He's cutting himself. Why would he be doing that? People who are cutters are often doing it to stop the chaos in their heads. Now, I don't know a lot about cutting, but I do know this. I led a youth group up in Ottawa, and in that youth group there were several cutters in my youth group, and it was freaking me out. I didn't know what to do about it. Like, what in the world are you cutting on yourself for? So I went to a family therapist, and I booked myself into a couple of sessions with a family therapist because I needed to understand this. And she talked me through why cutting usually took place, what could have happened in the background, and what to look for. And I think I'm pretty sure I brought her in as a guest speaker in youth night as well once. And what I found out is that there's something traumatic that's happened in somebody's background, and now there's this chaos going on in their emotions in their head. And what cutting does is cutting relieves the chaos. It releases endorphins in the brain, and that it doesn't solve the problem, but it does help to stop the anxiety, stop the chaos. Cutting usually happens because somebody can't control their anxiety. They don't have a great mechanism to control anxiety, and so cutting is a way to manage that, which is very strange to me because I don't suffer from this, and I only know what the therapist says. And I'm certainly not saying that I'm any great resource for you to help you understand cutting. I would tell you to go to a better resource than me, but that's what I learned about this. Now, take that into this story, though, okay? The story doesn't tell us how it is that it happened. Mark isn't interesting in giving us a backstory, remember, but it does tell us what this guy was like. For some reason, probably for a very, very traumatic reason, he chose to surrender somehow. Something happened to him, he chose to surrender, he's running away from God, he's being very intentional about this, very overt about this, he's cutting himself. And so he has done something, even though it's based on a traumatic experience, maybe, he's done something to open himself up to this demon. Can a demon take control of you? Is that a scary question or a good question? Okay, only if you somehow pursue it. Or there's another case here as well, which is heartbreaking and scary. If you're a child and you're subjected to an environment that pursues this stuff, then yeah, that could happen to you too. Mark chapter 7, verse 25 to 26. A woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek born in Syrian Phoenicia. She's a Canaanite woman. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her. So this is a Canaanite woman. If I read it from Matthew, you would see that she's Canaanite. So the politically defeated Canaanites, okay, the Canaanites that God sent the Israel into the promised land and said, you're going to kick out the Canaanites, you're going to drive them out because they have been offering child sacrifices. The Canaanites are wicked. They're killing their young to these images, these false gods, these demons. They're sacrificing children to demons. I'm kicking them out of the land, Israel. This is now your land, okay? So that's one of the reasons why God sent Israel to take possession of the land. We learned that. So this is the culture that this woman has come from. She's a Canaanite, no longer under Canaanite rule, under Greek rule, but she is, the holdback from the old Canaanite time. She's still alive in the land, even though it's under Greek rule. So we can only make some guesses here because Mark isn't giving us a whole lot of backstory here. She comes from a culture of temple prostitution and child sacrifice. And because she's got this child possessed by a demon, we can make some assumptions here. It's not in the text, but we can make some assumptions here that she's doing some stuff and she's involved in some things that she should not be, and it's setting her whole family at risk here. If the girl has a demon, something bad is happening in her house. And because the text is making a point of this woman being a Canaanite, who are known for child sacrifices and temple prostitution, then we get a sense here that this woman isn't on the up and up, that she is putting her family at risk, and her daughter has been submitted to this and really doesn't have a whole lot of protection. Listen, God does not let people get demon-possessed. God comes to deliver them, which is what we see in the text. Jesus was there as the deliverer. There's something going on here, and now Jesus comes as a deliverer. Yeah, there are some things that you can do to put you and your family at risk. There's some things that you can do to put yourself at risk. But you know what? Believers wouldn't do that. We're not that crazy, I hope. We're not that dumb, I hope. Pursuing things that are demonic sets you up for a demon. Pursuing things that are demonic sets you up to hurt your relationship with God. Who do you think is moving the Ouija board thing? Honestly, who do you think's moving that thing? Who do you think people talk to when they try to talk to the dead? The dead aren't talking, those are demons. Who do you think the palm reader is listening to as the palm reader's reading your hand? It's not your dead grandma, I'm telling you. Who do you think the tarot card reader is listening to when interpreting the cards? There's just demons. Who do you think the minor spirits are that are being sought within Wicca? Who do you think? The only spiritual option available outside of God is the devil and his demons. If you're playing around, going to some people, fortune tellers, trying to mess around with your head saying, this is what I see in the future, who do you think they're listening to? There's only one other option. People may call them by other names, going to look and talk to the dad. This is Uncle Ben telling you where he hid his money. Or this is an old soul explaining what he knows about the world. They're just demons. Don't set yourself up for that. What's true of the devil is true of demons as well. Resist them and they have to flee. Here's another question. If somebody has been playing around with this stuff and maybe they do have a demon, okay, how do you get rid of it? How is a person released from a demon? Well, listen, Jesus releases people from demons. We cast the demon out in Jesus' name. Now let's talk about disciples. We talked about the devil. We talked about demons. Let's talk about disciples. Who or what is a disciple? Or a Christian? Who or what is a believer, is a Christian? 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 13. Let's start here. For we are all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free. And we were all given the one Spirit to drink. As soon as you become a believer, the Holy Spirit lives within you. And that's true. As long as you are pursuing your friendship with Jesus, you have no reason to fear that anything else has the ability to inhabit you. If you're pursuing Jesus, you have the Holy Spirit. Nothing else can get in because He's filled you up. You are a child of God, free and clear, and protected from demons. As long as you don't go looking for them. Don't dabble. Don't be one of those Christians who say, yeah, but I'm just going to do this because it's kind of fun. It's entertainment. Don't do that. Don't dabble. Don't do things that would hurt your bond with God. Don't choose to follow demons because, you'll find them. If you choose to follow them somehow, you're going to find them. Now, let's talk about the origin of believers, your origin, my origin. Romans 3:23 says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We were born sinners. Outside of a relationship with God. We have all done bad things. Some of those bad things may have been really, really bad. Some of those bad things may have actually been surrendering ourselves to some kind of demonic influence. Sometimes it takes a little while to get clean, and I don't know why. I don't know all the ins and outs of this. This is purely by observation here. For some people, instantly when they come to Christ to get clean. For other people, it's gradual. And sometimes I've seen Christians who have been a Christian maybe a couple of years, and suddenly the demon manifests. Demons really don't like to be spotted, because once they are, they can't stay and they can't hide after they're spotted. I don't know why it takes some people a little bit longer than others. I don't have a clue, but I know that you can bring something into Christianity with you. And then as you continue to pursue your relationship with Jesus, Jesus will clean you out of all that. So let me talk about power, okay? The believer's power. What power do you and I have against the devil and against demons? Okay, what power do we have? James tells us, resist him and he will flee. And it's just like that. Jesus has given us power to drive out demons. In Luke 10:20 it says, however, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. And I know that that's a negative verse about this, but the reality is that you and I can cast out demons. We have been given that authority in Jesus' name. Jesus does the casting out. We've been given that authority. Continue to pursue the friendship, and you are going to continue to move toward better and better days, spiritually speaking. You're going to move towards spiritual healing. Let me end this episode with a Q&A. So on Facebook, I mentioned this is my topic, and is there anybody who has any questions that they would like specifically for me to address? So here's a Q&A. I'm going to read you what the question is, and then I'm going to give my response to it. Here's the first question. Can a Christian be tormented by a demon? How about possessed by one? Okay, the question about possessed, can a Christian be possessed by one? The answer is absolutely no, not unless you brought something into Christianity with you. So if you've done some kind of cult business or surrendered yourself to something without even knowing it, and you brought that into Christianity with you, then yeah, you will need to be cleaned out from that. But while you're a Christian, no, you absolutely cannot be demonized after you've given your life to Jesus, unless of course you're faking it and you're still dabbling and pursuing demonic things, and you're going to find them. So if you're pursuing Jesus, a demon absolutely cannot enter you beyond your will. Can you be tormented by demons? Yeah, you're going to be tempted all the time. That torment is going to be influencing you. The torment is some kind of influence over you to break your relationship with God and follow ungodliness. And that will be with you forever. You can call that demon oppression. You can call that temptation. Whatever you want to call that, yeah. The temptation will always be there to break our relationship with God. And that is being demon tormented. But in the case of it being internal and possessed, no, absolutely not. Where does Satan reside right now? That's the next question. And quite honestly, I don't fully understand the question, where does Satan reside right now? I don't understand fully why that's being asked. But so very simply, I'll say he's still active in the world. He's still, he and his minions, his demons, are still trying to pull us out of relationship with God. Now, I probably don't understand why that was asked, but there you go. Here's the next question. Has the war mentioned in Revelation 12:9 already occurred, or is John speaking of war to come? It's already happened. It's a flashback scene so that we understand the origin of where all of this fighting began in the first place. Here's another question. Does the devil have access to our thought life as Christians? And sleeping or waking is in parentheses here. Or only if we allow it through a lack of faith, succumbing to worldly temptations, etc. Then there's a quote here, resist the devil and he will flee from you, implies he still has access. Had a conversation with someone recently that believes that access is denied. I'm not sure. That's the full question right there. So here's my answer here. The devil is our arch enemy and will do whatever he can to influence you to break your bond with God. So that will be always real until Jesus comes back, or until we're dead in line with Jesus. The devil is a zealot, okay? He won't stop trying to get you to hurt your friendship with Jesus. So does he have access to your thought life? Well, he knows what's going to tempt you, absolutely. Waking or sleeping, can he read your mind? I'm not really sure if that's the point. Well, I think that's probably the point of the question, but I don't really think that's the point that we need to be dwelling on. What we need to be dwelling on here is that he's our arch enemy, and he's a zealot about what he is doing, and he will not stop trying to tempt you. So succumbing to his temptations, succumbing to any temptation is going to hurt your friendship with God, and that's what he's all about. He will only stop having access to influencing you when he's thrown into the lake of fire, or when we've died and are in the presence of Jesus waiting for the resurrection. Here's another question here, not directly related to the devil and demons, but somebody just was a little bit confused about disciples. What is or was the difference between 12 disciples and 12 apostles, and is or are there any that could measure up to those standards in today's time frame? All my friends who love talking about the fivefold ministry. Here we go. Here's my attempt at answering this question. Okay, so the 12 disciples, first of all, were Jesus' 12 followers in the Gospels. Okay, when we're talking about disciples initially, the 12 disciples were those 12 followers of Jesus, and we see them in the Gospel. And then, after that, those 12 people became known as the apostles. Well, 11 of them, and one was replaced in the book of Acts. So through the rest of the New Testament, we see that those were the apostles. So can anybody measure up as one of those apostles now? Okay, here, listen, the answer is yes and no, okay, and this is how I'm going to treat this question, yes and no, because I think I understand where this person is going with it, because I know them. The apostles' disciples, they have yes and no, they have and they have not been replaced. Because Jesus has not again physically walked with us, right? Because the incarnation has happened. Jesus came as a baby, grew up as a man. That hasn't happened again because Jesus has gone up to heaven waiting for him, okay? So in that sense, there is no longer an inner circle of just 12 guys hanging out with Jesus. So no, that can't be repeated. And that's also really good news for us because it's really an obsolete idea. Because things have gotten better. Things have changed since the Gospels. So apostle is now really defined as a church planter. It's someone who goes out and preaches the good news, gets people saved, and sets up Christian communities. So apostles really are now defined as church planters. So yeah, there are still apostles, if we want to define it as church planter. If we want to define the word apostle as someone who is still in authority to write passages of Scripture, then no. In that sense, no, there's none of them around today. And no, there's not going to be any more additions to the New Testament. But I don't think that's where you're going with the question. Apostles, how we define it today, is they are church planters. So like Peter, like the Apostle Paul, people are still going everywhere and planting churches. If you are a church planter, then in this kind of mindset definition, then you're considered an apostle. Here's another question that I received. Last question, and then I'm going to end it with just a one-sentence takeaway. Last question. Have you prayed over the church so they do not enter? Speaking about demons, have you prayed over the church so they do not enter? Okay, so I'm going to answer this in two ways here. So first of all, yes, we pray through the church a lot. I don't often like kneeling when I pray, because I have trouble focusing. So I actually walk and pray. So I go on prayer walks through my neighborhood, and I also pray walking through the sanctuary, only because that helps me to focus. That's really why I do that, just because it helps with my focus. I find that if I sit or if I kneel, my mind wanders too much, and I need to be a little bit more active, and that helps me. So yeah, many people have prayed around and through the church. Okay, that's the first part of that answer. Here's the second part of the answer. Have you prayed so that they don't enter? Oh my goodness. We want demons to enter. Hello. And here's why. Because demons don't bother buildings. A building doesn't have a relationship with God, can't be tempted to break a relationship with God, okay? So demons don't bother buildings. They bother people. So yeah, we do want demons coming in because they would be coming in with people. We want to free people who are bothered by demons. We want that. We want those who are under the influence and have been giving up to temptation. We want those kinds of people coming into the church because they need to hear the gospel and they need to be freed from Jesus. So if somebody comes into the church with a demon, if a witch comes into the church, if somebody who practices palm reading comes into the church, we want that because we want them exposed to the truth of the gospel. We want them exposed to Jesus, and we want them to be able to get free from the darkness that's binding them. Here's one last phrase that I want to leave you with so you can take this away. It's just something to summarize this whole episode, because I've gone on and on. I've had a lot of words, and how are you going to memorize all this stuff? Well, you're not. Just one last phrase for you to take away and say, that's what that episode was, and this is the application. And here's the phrase, 3 words. Pursue the friendship. It's all about your friendship with Jesus. Jesus is calling you into deeper friendship. Don't give that up. Don't allow temptations to break that bond that you have with him. Keep choosing the friendship. So here's the last 3 words. Pursue the friendship. God bless you. Thank you for staying to the very end of the podcast. Looking forward to next Wednesday when a new podcast is released. God bless you. See you next time.